Since 1968-69, the United States are a major deficit country. After the war, they were a surplus country in the 1950s because Europe was destroyed, China was nothing, Japan was occupied, right? Industry, the only industry in the world that produced magnificently was American industry. They were producing cars, washing machines, aeroplanes, consumer goods, Coca-Cola, Marlboro cigarettes, everything that the world wanted, right? So they were a surplus country, right? Their great worry was, in 1948, 49, 50, how would they sell all this stuff? Yeah. Right? This is similar to one of worry that, China has now. You have a lot of net exports which you rely on. How will you sell it? In the case of the United States was facing Europe and Japan that were destroyed. There was no money there. So what they did was they sent money. They dollarized Europe. They sent money to Europe, dollars, and to Japan. And that's how the Europeans and Japanese bought American goods. So they sent the money went back to sell goods, and they kept full employment happening in the 1950s. So it was a surplus country. From 1969 onwards, it's no longer a surplus country, the United States. It goes into deficit. Let's not go into the reasons why. Just briefly, two reasons. One is the Vietnam War. They were spending for the war, and therefore the government was going into deficit, and that money was accumulating in America. The Americans were using it to buy Japanese cars and French wines. I'm just making it very simple, but that's more or less the story. And the second reason was because they had helped the German and the Japanese industries tool up, improve their efficiency and so on, so that in the end the German and the Japanese factories were more efficient than the American ones. Now, in 1971, the American government under President Nixon, to be precise, on the 15th of August of 1971, decided to blow up the system they had created and essentially to stop dollarizing the rest of the world, to take the dollar away from the rest of the capitalist surrounding realm. And then they started doing something else. They used their deficit in order to create demand for the net exports of Japan, of Germany, of Italy, and eventually of China. So this is something that you can only do, however, if you own the one world currency, the dominant world currency. Because a country like Greece, a country like Germany, a country like China for that matter, if you are in deficit, at some point, how do you pay for your deficit? But if you're American and you issue the money of the world, you keep printing it and you use it in order to create demand for German factories, Italian factories, French factories, Japanese factories, and Chinese factories. And then, if you're a Chinese business person here in Shanghai and you sell aluminum to Los Angeles and you get dollars, what do? You take it to America. You invest in American bonds, so you finance the American state. You buy real estate in California or in Miami.
Which was what happened.
Which is what happens still, as we speak. Yes. And you buy some shares in companies they allow you to buy because they don't allow you to buy a lot of companies, right? And that's great for America. But this whole hegemonic power, this is incredible thing. It's the only time in human history that an empire gets stronger by being in the red, by being in deficit. This has never happened before. When the British Empire went to the red, it collapsed. When the Roman Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Dutch Empire, when an empire up until now went into deficit, it collapsed. That's why governments are very scared of deficits. But the Americans, when they went into deficit, they said, okay, we'll make it bigger. We will grow our deficit and make other people pay for it. But that requires the monopoly of the monetary transaction system, which they have. Why am I saying all this? Because to understand the new Cold War, you have to understand the terror in the hearts and minds of officials in Washington that they will lose this monopoly over money, over the payment system, the international payment system. And that, in the middle of this nightmare for them, is China. Because China is the only country in the world that can create an alternative payment system at the international level. It's nowhere near doing it yet in a way that would seriously damage the dollar, but they can see it happening. That is why I think they're prepared to unleash not only economic warfare, like Trump and Biden did, but actual nuclear warfare. Why is China a threat? We all know, here in China you pay with WeChat. In Europe, in America, we pay with Google Pay, with Apple Pay, with all sorts of pay, digital. We know that the power to accumulate has shifted from diesel engines and railways to owning the algorithms. What I call cloud capital in my book, Techno-Feudalism. Which countries own cloud capital?
China and
United States.
United States, yes.
So China is becoming a competitor to the United States in the realm of, in the type of capital, which is now giving maximum power to whoever owns it. But that's not the whole story. Now we have something else. Chinese banks and Chinese big tech, and I think WeChat is a very good example, have merged. So you can make payments using WeChat and you don't pay for it. WeChat doesn't withhold a percentage for you to make payments. In Europe, in the United States, if I pay with Google Pay, Apple Pay, a certain cut goes to the bank. The bankers in America, Wall Street, and big tech, what I call cloud capital, are not collaborating. They're refusing to collaborate. Why? Because the bankers do not want to share their banking rents with big tech, with Silicon Valley. So they're clashing. So the dollar payment system is fragmented because of this clash between the business interests of Wall Street and the business interests of the owners of cloud capital. In China, because you have state regulation, I'll be blunt, because you have a Communist Party telling the bankers what the limits are and telling Tencent and Alibaba and so on what the limits are. Chinese cloud capital and Chinese finance have merged into what I call cloud finance. It's seamless. If you add to that another great advantage that China has, it's a digital renminbi, the digital currency of the central bank, of the People's Bank of China, which is a magnificent tool. Because if everybody has one account with a digital wallet belonging to the state, to the central bank, essentially you're free of the bankers. The bankers will have to find ways of convincing you to put money in the bank, right? Because you don't need them anymore. You can make transactions using the digital currency that the central bank gives you. Right? So this really increases the efficiency of what I call cloud finance, creates competition for the bankers, and poses as an alternative to the dollar. Because think of it, take a German producer of some spare part. The example that I like to give, because it's a real example, is propellers, large propellers for ships that are built here in a shipyard near Shanghai somewhere. The metal, the aluminium or the steel is produced in China. It goes to Germany. There it becomes a propeller and comes back to China. If you're the German producer of the propellers, before the digital renminbi, you had to buy the metal from China, which means you would have to tell Deutsche Bank, to tell the Bundesbank, to tell the ECB, to tell the Fed, to tell the People's Bank of China, to tell the private banker here, to the producer of metal, that a certain amount of money has gone through. Every time, with every such node, you pay something, right? And you give control to the Americans, who are in the middle of this chain. And then, when the metal comes and you produce a propeller and you send it back, the Chinese shipyard has to go through this whole process again to pay you. But with a digital account that the People's Bank of China produces, the German manufacturer can have an app also. It's not confined to Chinese citizens, right? And then you press one button and you pay, and the shipyard pays another button and gets paid. Of course, in renminbi, not in dollars. As long as the German manufacturer has business with China, maybe wants to buy a Chinese electric vehicle or Chinese solar panels, then why use the dollar system? That is a clear and present danger to the hegemony of the United States. For me, this is the reason why the new Cold War is being unleashed against China. Let's say you're a Saudi sheikh, right? And you have lots of oil money, petrodollars. You think the Americans confiscated $450 billion from the Russians. Well, maybe they won't like me tomorrow, and maybe they will confiscate my dollars. So what you do is you don't put all your money in the Chinese superhighway, but you put some. You hedge your bets, right? The Americans see that, and suddenly they can see that their very old-fashioned, fragmented, backward payment system, which was the only one in the world, now has a superhighway competing with it. They are prepared to start a nuclear war to stop the shift, the transfer of funds, of transactions from their highway to the Chinese superhighway, because they know that the moment that transfer takes place, then American hegemony is finished.